Hello there, my name is Lise, and in this video we're going to have a look at a complete sculpting session inside of Nomad Sculpt on the iPad. This is going to be a workflow overview rather than a full-on tutorial. It's less own project. The original art is by artist doodlelotl, and I'd very much appreciate it if you checked out his work and give him a like. I'll have a link to his Twitter in the description below. While you're down there, don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. So the first thing I want to talk about is why I picked this concept art for this video. I was aiming for real time, so it needed to be something I could do in an hour. It ended up being an hour and a half because of reasons you'll see later in the video. The video was sped up by 50%, not to drag on too much, so it's slightly faster than real time, but I digress. So my point is that you need to give yourself realistic goals you can achieve. That's the main takeaway. So with the time limit and not knowing how far I can push Nomad Sculpt in terms of poly count and number of active meshes before it crashes or becomes difficult to manage, this, for me, was a reasonable goal. Once you've set your goal, it's a good idea to come up with an attack plan. How can you break your projects into smaller, more manageable chunks? So looking at the concept, I'm thinking of how I can break the model into small pieces. I'm looking for parts that are going to be difficult to sculpt as a single mesh. So even though the arm are part of the body, I'm breaking them off since they're so close to the face, it's going to be difficult to work on them. Breaking the head off allows me to hide it when it's in the way. Color and material changes are good things to break apart. So the eyes and bubbles are worked on separately from the head. Going over your concept logically, you can work out your plan of attack. And it's not set in stone as well, so you can always break things apart or merge them back together if you see a benefit to it. It's just to get you started. Okay, now that the intro is out of the way, we're going to jump into proper real-time voiceover. So you've decided how you're going to attack your project. So the first thing you need to do is break your model into actual smaller chunks. So this is going to be the block out phase. Initially I started using a single sphere to define the body and the tail. But you can immediately see that the tail, it's going to be very difficult to sculpt on the tail, as it's too close to the initial volume of the body, the hard shell. So I'm defining a cut. My logic was that maybe perhaps since the shell and the tail are the same color, they could have been blocked out as a single piece. But that's not going to work. So we're going to use the split tool and we are going to draw a curve, and that is going to break our model into two meshes. So now we have two separate meshes. We are going to rename them because they have a very generic name, and that's going to make things more manageable. Trying the new input method in iOS 14. There, so now we have our body and we have our tail. Jumping into the exposure, into the environment menu, I can adjust the exposure. And now I've imported that in the intro. At the beginning of the video, I imported in the scene manager, you can, in the environment manager, background manager tab, you can set and you can import a reference image. So I was trying that out for the first time. So trying to align this roughly. The issue is that for some reason, I think it's because I moved my my reference image down, but for some reason every time you import a new topology, a new mesh inside your mesh menu, the entire scene jumps up. So if you align your model, for some reason it gets the alignment goes away because it jumps up. Because I think it's because I've moved my background down. So perhaps if you leave your reference image in place and don't edit it, it won't jump. Perhaps, it's only a theory. So using only basic geometry, we're going to block out most of the scene. I specifically chose this image because it was cute. Everybody loves Pokemon. And yeah, there are a lot of very simple shapes. So the head is a sphere. It's mostly spheres because it's cute. That's the design language behind it. So you could see that when I added a new mesh to the scene, it jumped back up. So that's all we're going to be doing for a while. Using the gizmo, you can scale along the various axes that you can see, and you can rotate and scale your model. I didn't understand what the where the scaling control was at first, but it's the outer ring. So if you look at your 3D gizmo, there's an orange outer ring, and that's what you have to manipulate if you want to adjust the scale of your active model. For some reason, I've imported spheres and they came out as boxes. They were named as boxes, so I think that's more a bug than anything. So duplicated the when you have your list with all your meshes, there's a logo with two rectangular shapes. That's to copy your model. That allows you to duplicate them. So I've duplicated the, you can see that on the left, the right next to the trash can. That's the duplicate icon. So since they're mostly always all the same shapes, I'm just going to use that and just duplicate them over and over, taking the time to rename them because the scene is starting to be fairly busy. Aligning things roughly. At some point we are going to stop looking at the reference because there are no ways for us moving the model around. You can see that things are not aligned, so I'm turning the model and trying to make to place them in a position that makes sense. When you only have a single view, you have to make some decisions, and that's going to be one of the reasons why this video ended up being half an hour longer than anticipated. Because at one point I tried to make sense of what's not seen on the reference. So when you move your model around, you move things around to a position that makes sense. Here I've decided to work on the head. I see there's a little divot that happened at one point. Don't know why. I found that the smoothing brush isn't as strong as I would have liked. You can turn off the relax option. You can see that on the bottom left of the smooth tool, and that helps a lot. But I think that the smoothing brush intensity set to the maximum isn't strong enough. I wish it could be boosted more. because even if I'm pushing really hard with the pen on the iPad, I think it's barely doing anything to the surface. Here I'm painting. I didn't realize that I had the paintbrush active. For now, I'm just adding random white colors just to make it easier for me to see. We are going to shape the tail a little bit. Right now it's the very early ugly geometry we pulled out of the main body. So I've redid the topology using voxels. Under the topology tool, you can set how you want to remesh your model. So I use the voxel approach. Inside of Nomad Sculpt, there aren't any easy ways for you to pose a model. So it's best to sculpt the model in the pose you are aiming for, rather than working like you would in perhaps some other software you're familiar with. In other software, you have the ability to work on your model in a T-pose with the arms straight along the sides, and then you can pause your model, so that way you can work using symmetry turned on. But if you're working on a full character inside of Nomad Sculpt, since there aren't easy ways for you to pause the model, I would advise you to turn off symmetry and just work on the entire model in a posed pose. Cleaning up the geometry on the body. Right now it's going to be mostly just blocking things out. So you lay down some geometry with the closest shape you have available to you. And the shape doesn't really matter because you can always sculpt it to meet your needs anyways. But find the one that's closest to what you need, lay it down, and then move it around. And that's basically all there is to it. Now we are going to just move things around. I'm looking at my concept, and what I'm looking for are some curves. So you can see there's a curve for the shell on the underbelly. There's a nice loop that goes from this under the arm and way that curves down and goes around to the tail. So that's what I'm looking for. There's a little bit of twist to the body, so I'm turning the body around. So yeah, you have your concept and you're trying to make sense of it in 3D. You try to match things as close as possible. So we are going to look at our reference for a while. So we're going to lay down a few things, change a few things, then look at it, edit it. You can see there's another divot on the back of the head for some reason. I think it's the move tool I used at one point that made these little artifacts. But yeah, we're going to refer to our reference. We're going to look at it. We're going to change things and so on. But at some point you have to stop, because at 2D, there are few artists that can draw in 2D and have it match a real camera, a real 3D camera, the deformations of a real camera. So what 2D, it's an approximation of life, and since it's an approximation, you can't have a one-to-one camera in 3D that will perfectly line up to what you see in 2D. So there's a point where you have to stop looking, stop staring at your reference, because things are not going to line up. Things were simplified, things were stylized, things work from this point of view, but might not work from another point of view in 3D. So at one point you have to stop and stop staring at your reference. Once everything is more or less in the ballpark of what you're going for, you should stop staring at your reference, or not stop, you should look at your reference, but you should look at your reference on another monitor or print it out and look at elsewhere, not comparing it directly with your model like we do here inside of Nomad Sculpt, because it's never going to line up perfectly. There's no way to save our viewport as of yet, so every time we move the camera a little bit, things are going to be misaligned and so on. So at one point, once everything is proportioned like the concept, you should just stop using the reference and just do the best you can by looking at your reference but somewhere else. So you're not comparing pixels against pixels. That's what I mean. You should look at your reference. You should never stop looking at your reference if you're trying to reproduce it. But it's never going to line up perfectly, and you're doing yourself a disservice if you're trying to match it perfectly, because at one point it's not going to work. So you get it close, and then turn off the reference inside of Nomad Sculpt and don't go to it ever again. If it's close enough to what you see on your other monitor or on your print, it's going to be good enough. Here I'm masking to create the inner mouth, but my mask is not giving me good enough contours. So I'm subdividing the model to have enough geometry, because we're masking polygons. So the more you subdivide, the sharper and more precise your mask can be. So here I'm masking, unmasking, masking, unmasking to get the shape I want. It's not going to be perfect, so we're going to get it close, and that's going to be good enough. Invert our mask. Using the mask shortcut, you tap in an empty space. Having a doubt, I do it by muscle memory. But yeah, either you tap or you drag inside the empty space, and that will invert your selection. Then we use the move to shove everything inside the head, and we are going to remesh it. Not dynamesh, wrong software. Okay, now we have this. We are going to subdivide it a bunch. And we are going to clean this up to be as nice looking as possible. Because when you're masking and moving something, the edge of your mask, you aren't creating new geometry. You're just pulling on a very limited amount of polygons. So that's why we remeshed it afterwards. Even here, you can see there's a lot of stretching around the mouth's edge. So I've remeshed it again. I'm using the flatten tool to try to clean up the edge. But like I said in my review of Nomad Sculpt, I think the flatten brush doesn't work like the polish brush would inside of ZBrush. So it flattens things, but it's not very useful to clean things. So I want to clean that edge because you can see a lot of little divots and artifacts, and that's not something I want. So I'm going to try and use the a flatten brush, but that's not going to work. I'm going to undo it. And I'm going to use the pinch brush to try and clean the contours of the mouth. Pinch is one of my favorite sculpting tools. It allows you to commit to something. So instead of having things be very wobbly, you can really push. If a crease is barely there with a pinch, well, you just go over it with the pinch brush and you can make it really there. You can see that the eyes are too big and intersect. Already you can see that I'm struggling, and just barely moving the model, rotating the camera just a little bit, makes things look completely off. So it's very difficult to align. So now we're starting to reach the point where it's difficult to use the reference. So I aligned it as best I could, and now I'm tweaking the mouse shape to conform to the design as close as I can. That's going to give me a little bit more space to move the eyes in. But now that I've aligned the camera to this angle specifically, now I have to try and make everything align with that angle. But if I just rotated the camera a little bit, it would be off, and you'd have to realign everything. So it's not ideal. So since you have the option to select multiple meshes to merge them, I find that sometimes when you just want to move from one mesh to another mesh, it's a bit too much work, because you have to select the mesh you want to work on, and then you have to remember to deselect the mesh you don't want to work on anymore. So it's a little bit more work for just switching from one mesh to another. I think there's a way to tap on the mesh you want to work with, but I find that it's less reliable. So I turned off almost all touch controls inside of Nomad Sculpt. I used a keyboard with Nomad Sculpt, so most of my shortcuts are on the keyboard, because I find that I have a tendency to make a lot of undos, redos, selecting things I don't want to select, and so on with my fingers, because just laying my finger on the tablet right before I put the pen sometimes counts as an input. So I find that a little less reliable than just using a keyboard. Trying to align the bubbles. That's almost the last piece of geometry we were missing. I think the last thing I will be adding later is the tongue. So looking at the concept, you can see that the eyes are actually very round. Now they have this kind of egg shape. So going around the eye, we're going to adjust that, and the eye are very, very, very spherical right now, so I'm going to flatten them a bit as well. But yeah, you go around looking at your model from every angle and thinking, if this looks good, if it doesn't look good, why doesn't it look good? You try to push the shapes. So you want to think about the outer shape. So here I'm thinking about the outer shape of the eyes. They should be rounder. There's always, they taper out on the top like an egg. That's not something I want. And when they look good from an angle, once I rotate the camera, they look off from another angle. Also due to the shape of the head. We don't have any eyelids or cavities for the eyes, like a skull would. So they're floating on top of the head. That's something that's easy to do in 2D. In 3D, that's a little bit more problematic because things have to come from somewhere and go somewhere. So yeah, you have to look at it from every angle, mostly concentrate on the view you're going to save out. So that's your main focus. Here I'm going to focus on the angle of the concept, but you have to look at it from every angle just to make sure it makes sense and it works. If you were to make a video, your model turning around, so on, needs to make sense from the most angles as possible. But if you're only rendering out a single view, focus on that single view more than anything. That leg was too much inside of the body. Didn't make sense. Trying to have a nice little curve outside. Trying to make that curve from the body. Well, that curve that goes from there, under the armpit, that goes around and to meets where it meets the tail. Because that's something that was on the concept, so that's something I want to capture here. The shape of the torso doesn't make sense since it's kind of twisting. So I'm changing, tweaking things around. But that's mostly it. You just lay things, you block out your model. And once you've blocked out your model, all you do in sculpting is comparing to your target you have in your head and just tweaking the shapes and the curves to match that target you have set for yourself. Not saying it's easy, but that's the idea, that's the workflow, that's what you're aiming for. You look at a shape, you look at it from every angle, and you ask yourself if it's right or if it's wrong and what's bothering you, and you make a call. So you're saying, I don't like this curve, I think this curve could be better. You're looking at shapes. So this doesn't make sense. Where is this arm going in? Where is this arm going towards, what's the beginning of this silhouette, where does it go, where does it end. So you keep looking at your model from every angle, trying to understand it, and yeah, you keep at it. It's ugly until it's done. Now we're starting to add some color in, just to start to see the finished thing come together. We've blocked it out as a gray thing for long enough. My wonderful writing skills. I'm using the Magic Keyboard with the iPad Pro, and I like it to type on. It's very nice to type on. You have a full laptop experience with the trackpad and all, but I don't like the angle of the Magic Keyboard, so it doesn't go backwards enough. So when you're sculpting or drawing, it's just a little too steep of an angle. So that's why writing at such a steep angle is sometimes difficult for me. You can see me. Screen recording, because I didn't know how long I could screen record the before the iPad overheated or the video files were too big to manage and so on. So I had to hit record every once in a while, and at one point I forget to turn on recording on. So there's a bit that gets skipped near the end. Looking at that torso is giving me a lot of trouble, because I'm not sure I understand it completely just from that single point of view. So I'm looking at it. Is it soft? Is it hard? How much can it twist? What's the actual shape of it? The video ended up being a bit longer because at one point I thought that maybe it only covered the belly and not necessarily the entire torso. Because looking at parts of the concept, you could see that there's a bit of skin where the arm meets the body, so there's a bit of skin showing there. So I think if the concept showed it, you would see there probably there's a shell in the back as well, but you couldn't see it on the concept, so I didn't put a shell there, but I left the option for adding a shell later. So I tried to make at one point I decided to make a shell for the belly that is in not two parts, because I faked it But yeah, more of a shell like the like turtles. A bottom shell and a back shell, belly shell. That shape of that arm is completely off. Yeah, the more time you spend with it, you fix something, and then you compare something else. And every time you fix something, it might affect the entire model. So you have to keep at it, keep going around, keep looping around your model, looking at it from every angle, changing things a bit. It's easier to think of it instead of sculpting perfectly proportioned things. What I'm going for here is I'm looking at it from a silhouette side. So I'm turning the camera and then I'm looking at the outer shape of the thing I'm working on. And from that point of view, I'm tweaking it. Then I'm turning the camera again, and then I'm looking at from the other angle, and so on, so on, so on. So it's like you're always drawing. If you were to draw the model from that point of view, what curve would the outside of that shape be? So you're trying to mimic that angle you would draw. So from every point of view, I'm trying to make sure the silhouette works as if I were to draw that model from that angle. So I'm not making the arm perfect from a single point of view. I'm just constantly turning around my model and trying to make it work, having the best shape overall for every point of view that I can come up with. Really trying to work on that curve. You want to have that nice curve from the bottom that goes into the tail. That's important. That's part of the design. But yeah, here I took an hour and a half, and the more you stick to it, the better it gets. There are no magic shortcuts. The more time you spend on working on something, the better it gets. It's mostly, you can see it's mostly the move tool. It's a pretty simple model. So since it's very cartoony, very round shapes, there isn't a lot of sculpting fine shapes into it. So most of it is just working the shapes, and there isn't any shortcut to that. You have to stick to it, and you just have to commit, and the more time you spend looking at it, the more time you spend working on it, the better it gets. The more experience you have, of course, the faster you are. But there isn't anything that time won't solve. The more you stick to it, the more mistakes you catch, the better it gets. You just have to circle around your model, fix everything you can see. Don't think of it as necessarily like that's the shape of an arm, that's the shape of a leg or something. Think of it as lines you're trying to work with. You're trying to draw lines into 3D, so The exterior shape is a line. The contact between two adjacent shapes are lines. So where the bubbles meet the face, that's a line. The outside of the bubble, that's another line. So you have to work those lines. If your shapes are good, that's more important than anything you can add as surface details. If your model is good, if the shape of your nose is good, that's more valuable than adding pores, than sculpting it pores on the nose. That's useless. That's something you can add once you've reached a certain level on your model. That's something you can add, of course, but that's not something you should focus on. You should really focus on nailing the shapes, because that's the first thing everybody is going to see. So if your shapes are wrong, it doesn't matter how detailed of the skin is if the shape of the nose is wrong. So really take your time, work on the shapes, because that's all these things are. They're just shapes. If you think something is difficult, try not to think of it as if you think that maybe sculpting an ear is difficult, just don't take it step by step. Just make the big shape of the ear, then work on the smaller shapes and so on, and just work on those curves, work on those intersections and so on, and slowly you're gonna make perfect looking ears just by working on the shapes. It's like when we started, we blocked out the character. It would have been very, very, very difficult to sculpt this entire thing as a single mesh. It's not impossible, but it would have been very difficult. So if you are struggling with making anything, break it down into smaller chunks and then work on the shapes. You're not doing something in a single stroke.